Alright, so you clicked on this video because you want to learn how to add more depth and ambience to your mix. Now, this is what your mix could possibly sound like right now. And then this is what it sounds like when you add a little bit more depth and ambience. And accomplishing this is actually pretty simple. We just need to use some synths and some effects and samples. So let's hop right in to how this works. I'm going to start by muting all of these so we can go one at a time on showing you what each of these is doing. This is a pretty busy mix, so there's a lot of tracks in here. I'm going to try to get through these as fast as I possibly can. First thing we have is we have a string. That's like the underlying melody. I'll give you another example on another song where the string is used. Okay, next we have ambience 1, which would sound like this. It's pretty subtle, but that's the point. We don't want to like overpower these because we're just trying to add tiny little bits of layers that ultimately make a big ambient depth inside of our mix. We don't want to just have like one string or one ambient effect really loud because and then it kind of sounds cheesy. We want a lot of little things adding up to the final result, kind of like if you're baking a cake or something. Like you aren't just going to add a lot of eggs, right? You just need one egg because that's what it needs to be able to be a cake, right? So next is ambient 2. Just adds a little bit more feel. Then we have ambient pad high. So I won't bore you by going through all these synths. I'll just kind of unmute these and A/B what it's like to have these MIDI instruments on and what it's like to not have them on. If you want that modern quality, having these instruments underlying your main instruments in your band is going to really help you out. One thing I also like to do with these instruments is I like to add extra layers of bass so I can have a fatter low end. It's basically just assisting the bass. Also, we have another one. Also down here, just having little bits of piano in places also helps. Here's a better. What else we got here? I like to use this hi-hat ambient for extra like energy. Again, these aren't really designed for you to be able to hear them clearly in the mix. They're just adding something extra underneath to make the mix seem a little bit more big. Also, what I like to do is when there's like a really fast part that needs a lot of energy, I like to add an extra kick stomp. Show you an example of what this is. An interesting thing that I do with the kick stomp is I usually like to put an amp sim along with it, but for some reason this file got corrupted. But I usually put amp sims on here as well. What else we got? Pad. Something that I really like is these war drums as well. Just adds a little bit more power in that one part that I needed it to. And right here, using that kick stomp again. So that's basically how I use MIDI instruments to add a little bit more depth and ambience. Now, I will say it's probably not recommended to have this many VSTs open. You should probably be printing these into actual waveforms, but just don't do what I do, because I'm probably taking a lot of CPU on my computer. So if you have like a lower spec computer, make sure to like export these to waveforms. And also, I don't know if you've ever seen this many tracks before, but I remember opening a mix before and it had like 150 tracks. And I was only used to working with like literally just 2 guitars, bass, and drums, right? Like I was very basic. And then when I seen a mix that had 150 tracks, I was like, oh, this is why it sounds so good. Because it's not just the basic instruments, there's also stuff underneath. That's what opened my eyes to having a 100-track instrumental album. Even though there's only 4 instruments in the band, there's 100 tracks, right? So I hope if you've never seen something like this, it kind of opens your eyes. Because as soon as I started adding extra layers, my mixes got so much better. Not just because I got better at mixing, but it's because I got better at producing. A lot of the reason why you may think that your mix sucks right now is because you just aren't good at producing yet. So I'll get better at producing, and then your mixes will sound much better because your production is already good. But what I want to move on to next is effects. Effects really add a lot of excitement to your mix. So what I like to do is I like to use a few different categories of effects. I like to have impacts. I like to have uplifters. I like sweeps and subdrops and snare bombs. That's pretty much all the effects that I'll ever use. And that's pretty much what you'll only need. So I'll go ahead and give you some examples of these effects. So right here. So that's my low impact, and then I also want a high impact on top of it. This is what they sound like together. I would say layers is the key to the game. When I found out about having a bunch of layers, it really changed the game for me. Same with like uplifter low. So that's like the low end version of the uplifter. Then we have uplifter high. And together they sound like this. I'm not sure why my CPU is crackling. By the way, if you ever have problems with like crackling in your audio, it's probably because your buffer size is too low. Yeah, so to change your buffer size, you just go to device and then block size. It's also called block size, but I think it's called buffer size as well. If you ever hear that crackling, it's because you had a bunch of VSTs and maybe other programs on your computer opening, like I'm recording as I'm running Reaper as well. So increasing the block size helps lower that CPU crackle that you'll sometimes hear in your headphones. And so that's the uplifter. I also use this impact sometimes. This one has a little bit more of like a uplifter into an impact. Sometimes parts need that. And then we got our sub drop. And obviously I use all of these parts in specific pockets of the song. I'm really adding these effects as effects, and I'm adding the MIDI instruments as parts to help the song feel and sound better, not just because I want to lay down a bunch of stuff on it. I'm really being purposeful when I'm doing these things. Having that sub drop right there helped open up the mix and make it more powerful when that part hit. Next, I have samples. And by the way, I categorize these as MIDI instruments, effects, and samples. They're three different types of, let's say, post-production things. I like to keep them organized in their specific categories so I don't get effects mixed with samples or samples mixed with MIDI instruments. So here is an example of a sample. That just adds a little bit more. Like usually if I didn't have the sample right here, this part would be like completely silent in the mix. But I'm trying to keep the energy level up, so I add a little bit of a drone underneath and kind of like the silent part. Same with this. It's also important when you're getting samples from places that you make sure that they're in the same note and key as your actual performance. You don't want to just lay down a sample and have it be out of tune, right? You have to actually tune your samples. So there's no like tuning knob like on a guitar. So what I do is I right click on my sample and then I go to item properties. Let's see if you can see that. I go to item properties, and then right here on pitch adjustment, you can turn down the semitones. There's 12 semitones in the octave of every thing on the computer, on the piano. I'm not a theory genius, but there's 12 semitones. So there'd be like A sharp, B sharp, C sharp. There's 12 of those going up from A to G on the notes. So I'll just give you an example of what this sounds like. So just by doing that, you can tune your samples, because a lot of time you'll get a sample and be like, oh, that sounds great, and you put it in your mix and it's out of tune. So I just use semitones to actually change the pitch of the samples. Right there's a little break beat. What else we got here? Also have a wobble. And that's kind of going along with the guitars. I also play samples, effects, and MIDI instruments to complement some of the instruments that I already have, like in the band, right? Because sometimes having a MIDI instrument underneath, like if you're layering bass, like having an extra like sub bass under the bass guitar, it helps the bass guitar get pushed more to the front. Or having this wobble underneath this like dissonant bendy guitar, it helps the bendy guitar sound better. And what we got here? Right here, I did a side chain. So every time that this MIDI is triggered, a compressor dips it in volume. And that's pretty much all I do to add more depth and ambience to my mix. And by the way, if you're looking at this Reaper session and you're like, whoa, that's a lot of stuff, like how do I make my Reaper session look like that? Well, I have a free Reaper template down in my description. You can go download it completely for free. All I ask for is your email address, and you will have everything set up like I have right here. Also, if you like my production style and you like the sound of my mix, I also offer mixing, mastering, and producing services. I have a special offer right now, so if you're watching this video a couple years from now, it's probably not going on anymore, but right now, since I'm just starting, I will mix, produce, master your first project for free. It does not matter what project it is. If it's a single, an EP, album, I will do whatever it is absolutely for free for you. So I think this is the part where the YouTubers say do the things to help them get more followers and likes. So just do those things for me. I really appreciate it. See you in the next video.